Coming up next on the Wet Fly Swing podcast.
I'm not one to paint a false pretty picture, right? This is the first ever team and the first ever world championship. And it was really, really, really difficult. In fact, we went over a few weeks early to practice. And there was a point where, one of my really close friends and fellow guide, Lindsay, and fellow teammate, Lindsay Zoffren in Red Lodge, Montana, where we were like, we're never going to do this again. This is there's no way.
That was Tess Weigand describing her experience at the first ever Team USA World Championship. Euro nymphing tips, microliters, and brown trout today on the Wet Fly Swing podcast.
Welcome to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show, where you discover tips, tricks, and tools from the leading names in fly fishing today.
Hey, how's it going today? Thanks for stopping by the show. We are right in the middle of a big launch, a big giveaway going on. The Steelhead School is full on right now. If you want to enter this at a chance to head over to with Jeff Liskay and myself, we're heading out. I'm actually heading over to Jeff's neck of the woods. If you want to enter this giveaway right now, wetflyswing.com/giveaway, and you can do that right now. If you want to enter, if you actually want to just purchase this trip, we've got 6 slots available on top of the giveaway. If you want to join this trip, you can send me an email, dave@wetflyswing.com, and just put Steelhead School in the subject line, and we can chat from there. And still enter the giveaway, because if you win the giveaway, we're going to give you that, and we would refund your money if you already purchased one of those slots. Range Meal Bars has one of the best tasting and power pack bars on the market. I'm a huge bar fan. I've eaten everything from Cliff Bars, Power Bars, Pro Bar, you name it, right? All the bars out there. And I can tell you, the Range Meal Bar is good tasting and packs a serious punch. Actually, there's more in this, more calories to keep you going than any of the other bars. So if you want something in a pinch, if you missed a meal, if you're getting out there fishing and you can't quite hit breakfast, need something to keep you going through the day, this is what you need to check out. wetflyswing.com/range right now, RANGE. Fairflies creates ethically sourced premium fly tying materials with their 5D brushes. You simply tie better flies faster. 5D brushes contain perfectly proportioned materials to tie amazing streamers, bass, and saltwater flies. Fairflies also creates intentional supply chains so you can change the world with every fly you tie. Head over to wetflyswing.com/fairflies right now. That's FAIRFLIE. Fairflies. Tess Weigand is here to break down her best Euro nymphing tips and what she does as a guide to get her clients into fish. We discover what her year looks like fishing Central PA, which hatches you should be thinking about if you're heading out into that area of the country, and how this all got started with a connection to the USA youth team. This is a real fun one with Tess here, so I'm excited to share this one with you today. Without further ado, here we go. Tess Weigand from thefeatheredhook.com. How's it going, Tess?
Hey, it's going pretty well. About to get into our fall season, so it's a perfect timing to start talking about all things wild trout.
Perfect. Yeah, we're going to dig into, you're in central Pennsylvania. We've had a number of episodes focused on, people in and around Pennsylvania. I'll put some links out there. George Daniel dug into a little bit, and we had some mono nymphing and stuff like that. So it's obviously that's a hot place for fly fishing. And I know you have some past, I think you got started, maybe part of it was the fly fishing at the university. But we're going to dig into all that. You're also on Team USA. You got a bunch of stuff going on. So let's take it back before we get into your guiding and what you have going now. Talk about how you first got into fly fishing.
Oh, that's a great question. So I feel like I have the very non-traditional entry into the sport that differs from a lot of people, especially in the Pennsylvania area. I didn't grow up fishing at all, really. I did, in fact, take the fly fishing courses at Penn State when I was a student there, simply because it seemed way more interesting than the walking club, which were some of the only other options. Wow. Yeah, so I've always been, outdoorsy and everything, and that's kind of how I fell in love with it. But didn't really start fishing until after I graduated, and loved central Pennsylvania so much that I decided not to leave, something I was never expecting to do. and just wanted something to do other than hike with my dog,
Mm-hmm.
who always needed to be near water because he would just constantly overheat. So it was just a graduation into that. And then I apparently can't ever just have casual hobbies. So
That's it.
just never stopped.
You've gone all in. Now
Yeah.
you've got from that you've gone into, like we said, Team USA. You've got the fly shop you're involved with, the lodge, a bunch of things there. What was so you're in college and you actually went to, this was at Penn State where you got your degree there?
Yeah. Yes.
What were you on track to do when you were in college there?
Agronomy, agricultural science.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah. Something completely not related unless we're talking from the conservation perspective.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I gotcha. So you're in that. And then at what point do you know that, is fly fishing, at what point did you know that was going to be your track?
I didn't even know that guiding was a job until Jonas, the owner of the Feathered Hook, asked me if it was something that I would have any interest in doing. I, had an illustrious, promising career in agriculture and then just kind of threw it all away to work for this, fun little fly shop, much to my parents' chagrin, I would say, which totally different now because we're partners at the lodge and now I have them in it too,
Oh, wow.
For better or worse.
That's cool.
But yeah, no, I worked for a nonprofit in kind of the organic agriculture world and decided that I really enjoyed being self-employed. And that's when Jonas approached me. I was friends with who is our head guide, Matt Kowalchuk, and it kind of just drug me in and had no idea it was something that I wanted to do. And then just took a couple years and really learned what it meant to be a good guide. And
wow.
Yeah, here we are. Never looked back.
No kidding. So what was that? So now you're guiding. What's what have you learned from the guiding? You talk about what learning about being a guide. Was that just your kind of like with Matt kind of next to him, or what are some lessons? If somebody's listening here and they're thinking about being a guide, what would be your tips for them?
Yeah, that we obviously don't have a guide school, which I know exists out there now, and I'm sad to say I really don't know anything about them. So perhaps take this with a grain of salt. But I wanted to make sure that I knew every nook and cranny of the waters that I was going to be guiding. I wanted to make sure, and that took years, right? Years of fishing everywhere, all the time, in every type of situation, making sure that I could provide our clients with, the best possible experience based on what they were looking to get out of a day. And so that's not just, obviously about the fishing. We talk about that, right? A lot in the guiding world. It's about, your rapport and having a good time and really being able to focus on what somebody is looking to accomplish or learn or just relax and have some fun. And so I think a big part of being a good guide is how you interact with your clients. And so a lot of it has nothing to do with the fishing, right? Like you have to be, at least in central Pennsylvania, you have to be quite good and technical, and be able to, explain this really complex stuff to people who may only do it a few times a year, to make it, so they can absorb it and learn something from it, but also make it not serious and a lot of fun. And so I think like focusing on that type of thing, and making sure that you can communicate that all quite well in a way that is, supportive and fun is probably the best advice that I have.
That's awesome.
Yeah, make sure you have backup plans and backup plans and backup plans.
That's good advice. So basically, then that's great. So you're out there and you've got all this going. And we're going to dig probably into a little bit of the lodge and some of the other cool stuff you have going. But let's take it into the fish. Brown trout is one of the species that you focus on there. If we were going to be, if we were thinking about putting a trip together there, I like to kind of go down this route sometimes. What does that look like if somebody called you up and said, hey, I want to go fishing, central PA and focus on browns? Is there a better, best time of the year? When would you recommend?
Oh, yeah. Well, obviously spring. Spring is, the bread and butter, right? That's one of my favorite, well, actually, I guess you could say my favorite part of the rivers that we have here is just the diversity of our insects, right? I've not really experienced anywhere else in the world quite like it. And it's just the fishing that gives us from essentially even the times of mid-March, weather depending, through the middle of June is just, there's something different every day. And so the fact that every day is going to be different, you're going to have this like smorgasbord of insects that every fish is going to want something different every hour of the day is what keeps it incredibly fun. So depending on, spring obviously being great, fall can also be wonderful. And we've got great fishing in the winter if the weather's, okay. But when it comes to spring, people obviously always think of our green drake hatch, which is wonderful. Don't get me wrong. I absolutely, every year, don't ask me at the end of the season because I'm just like, get these bugs away from me.
Yeah.
But, the first couple like good swarms of the year, you're like, oh yeah, no, this is why it's so cool. This is why we hype this up. But April is actually one of my favorite times. It's a little less crowded. The fish are like just really figuring out how hungry they are. And we start to get some really great hatches. And they, you can find rising fish all day. When we've got Hendrickson's, Granums. It can be one of my favorite times.
Is that your focus when you're out there, taking a client out there, is to think like dry flies? Is that always the start, or are you doing multiple different types of techniques?
No, I mean, so that's the other really cool thing about the diversity of Penns Creek, is that it has some of the best dry fly fishing that I've ever experienced, but it's not somewhere that, you can really just go prospect with a dry fly and do really well. I mean, not saying that that's not a good or fun technique. And if that's, if I'm going to go fun fishing, sometimes that's all I want to do. But it's not a place like out west where you're going to have really opportunistic fish keying in on something like that. And so it's really fun to be able to take clients out and, show them how to fish a river like this, utilizing all of these different techniques. Like, we talk about obviously Euro nymphing or tight line nymphing and, dry dropper, dry fly only. We essentially will nymph until we find a rising fish.
Okay. Perfect.
Yeah. Which I think makes the day really fun. That. Yeah. Yep.
So you're Euro nymphing basically until you find some rising fish. Is it Euro? Is that your focus?
Yes. But don't get me wrong. I mean, in April, we've absolutely had days where we've just fished dry flies to rising fish, which is one of the reasons I really like that time of year.
Yeah, that's great. So in this time of year, does it just kind of get too hot? There's not as many hatches as like July, August, September?
Yeah. So July, we tend to shift a little more into some smallmouth stuff. And for better or worse, I've become obsessed with tying just big bass streamers, which, really doesn't, it's not like the bang for your buck, like tying nymphs.
No.
And then, so it's Penns Creek, the past couple of years, we've had some tough summers, right? Penns Creek is just, even though it is a spring creek, it's really long. And your cold water influences kind of get broken up the further down into the like catch and release section. And so you really have to worry about those temperatures increasing. So we don't, we stay off of it during the summer.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, but we've just had really, really low flows, droughts.
Yeah.
One we're kind of in right now. Yeah. But we actually have a stretch of private water just above the confluence of, where Upper Penns meets with Elk and Pine Creek and becomes the main section of, the more fly fishing focused section. And fortunately, our stretch of Pine Creek has numerous groundwater sources. So we have a stream monitor out and it's never gotten above like 59 degrees. So fortunately, we always have some good cold water and like a true spring creek that we can fish during the summer. But our hatches do definitely die down quite a bit this time of year. So we like to help people learn other species and yeah.
Gotcha. Well, I want to talk about some Euro nymphing as well, as we go here. But so let's take it to if we're fishing there, we're coming in. Let's just say it's springtime. There's some hatches that start to come off. talk about that. How would you know something's coming off? How do you know what to put on? Are you kind of IDing, that bug? I mean, because sometimes you'll see a hatch will come off and be like, well, I can't really tell what they're feeding on, right? Are they under the surface? How would somebody know if they were in Central PA? How would they know what to use?
Yeah. Well, it depends, Creek. So something different every hour. Um, but first of all, call us, right? Like a fly shop's not worth their weight unless they're really going to help you know what's happening that specific day, because that's the cool thing about around here is it's different every day. So first of all, call a fly shop, right? Ask questions. If you're not getting the answers that you're looking for, call a different one. But yeah, I mean, so I really the bug part is the really fun part to me. We say in the shop, like, the fish don't know the scientific names of these bugs, so don't worry about that, right? But basic identification is really important because we have so many different species, and sometimes, those fish are going to want a size 18 blue wing olive, even though you see a 14 in the late summer flying around, and so flipping over rocks, being able to show people in the water column, which emerging insects you're seeing. Obviously, any adult, being able to identify them. And, watching how the fish are feeding is something that I really like to help people focus on, right? Like, what type of rise did we just see? Can we actively see these fish eating this bug, right? Because it's very often not as clear as it may appear. So from the nymph perspective, that's I'm obviously a believer of, it's the drift, it's the presentation, it's the profile, it's all of those things. Penn's Creek pushes that button in a little bit different way than a lot of rivers do. But when it comes to any type of, emerge or eat or surface action, it is very rarely are they going to eat something different than what they're eating in that moment, unless it's a March Brown, because who doesn't want to eat a March Brown? Yeah. So that rise form, where they're feeding and, where they're moving from to eat, all of those things can tell you a little bit about what they're feeding on. So just taking a moment and sitting on the bank and watching it is what I really like to have people understand.
Gotcha. So if they were sitting there and you're nymphing, and they start rising, maybe some smaller fish that are kind of jumping out of the water, right? They're like going for something. And I don't know if you saw that, if it's smaller fish, do you think like, well, I'm going to switch and throw some dries even though they're smaller fish because there's probably some big fish in there, or what would be your focus there? And can you tell if they're jumping out of the water versus like just nipping their nose out, what it's doing?
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like that comes back to what are my clients' like goals of that day, right? Are we going to target? I love dry fly fishing, and if we've got these smaller fish, at the tail out of a riffle or something, just launching themselves out of the water, are they eating crane flies, emergers? Those can be really tricky fish to catch, actually, and some people have no desire to do that, but some people really want to work on that. And so it like really depends on what people's goals are, but I usually encourage them to like, let's take a swing at it, and sometimes that means obviously with a nymph, if we're not having success with an emerger type, or, a dry dropper can be a really, really good way to target those fish as well. So, I just want to like see what looks like a raindrop under some trees. That's when I really don't give people a choice. Those are the fish I want to target.
Oh, yeah. Raindrop. That means what are they doing when you see the raindrop under the tree type of deal?
Oh, they're typically eating adults on the surface, and they tend to be some larger fish.
Yeah, gotcha. So that's it. So the fish that's just kind of the crazy little fish that's jumping out of the water and eating there's some caddis or something like that hatching. Those are just, what are they? I mean, they're feeding obviously too, but you can tell the difference between that and a bigger fish.
Yeah, it's funny, people see like a big splash right out of the corner of their eye, and they'll be like, "Oh my gosh, that fish looked huge," just because of like the nature of the splash. When in fact, that was maybe like a 8 to 10 inch fish just going a little crazy for a caddis or something, like you said.
That's it.
And just having like, okay, but look at this fish in that really tricky spot in the place that I would want to live, in this obvious feeding channel. That one is going to be a really tricky fish to catch, right? Because I feel like so many anglers there's so many different types of anglers in that this person wants to catch a lot of fish. This person wants to catch a few big fish. This person wants to catch big fish in this particular way. Or this person wants to just catch fish, doesn't matter how big they are, just wants to catch them in the dumbest, hardest places. And that is also probably the type of angler that I am. And fortunately, we have a lot of opportunity for that on Penns Creek.
Mm. So like you said at the start, the big tip is always, call the fly shop, find out what's hatching, and what that you might expect, just to know on your box, right, to make sure you have the flies. And then when you get out there and you see something going on, maybe that fish is, that raindrop under the tree and that there's that big fish, potentially at say 1:00 or whatever, that what you might put on there, and then you can give it a shot, and then you can go through your box. I mean, when you do that, do you find that you're switching your dry fly, like you try one, no, it's not working, switch to another one, or do you feel like, when you see it, you can throw one on and you're going to get some action?
Okay, so you just know the right questions to ask. It's like you've done this before.
Yeah, exactly.
It totally depends. So if I'm out fun fishing, when you're out every day, and guiding every day, what's going on for the most part, right?
Yeah.
But what that fish is eating can absolutely change within an hour. And so as I'm watching a fish, I'm getting a really good idea of what it's eating. And I am absolutely communicating that to my clients, because that is a really important thing to understand. But so once you kind of get dialed in to what they're eating, one of my biggest pieces of advice to people, and this isn't necessarily just for dry fly fishing, is I just see people cycle through things too quickly, whether that's flies or it's water, right?
Yeah.
There are a lot of fish in Penns Creek. They're highly pressured. There are a billion bugs under there that you're competing with. So consistency is incredibly important. Every single drift looks different to those fish, whether it's on the surface or below. And they are feeding, they're so habitual, right? Like, let's not, trout are, we want to call them smart. We want to call them whatever, they're habitual.
Yeah.
And so being consistent is really important. Somebody will put like 3 drifts over a rising fish, and they'll be like, oh yeah, it's not going to eat. It's not eating. Let's, move on. It's like, well, your last 3 drifts, that fish was still swimming back down to the bottom after the last time it ate, or it ate just in front of your fly. You have to get on its timing. So don't give up, right? Consistency is really important. Just keep putting consistent drifts over that fish in a way that's safely not going to spook them, whether by lining them or whatever. And another big, sorry, not to get all into the, but I'm a big believer of don't mend over the fish unless you're not going to move that fly. If you have drag, let it drag through. That's going to disrupt that fish's feeding behavior more so than mending over them and moving that fly in a way that's incredibly unnatural.
Right.
So it's just like the consistency, and that may take 10 to 15 drifts, to get that right one on the right timing. So just not moving on too quickly.
Right. That's a good tip.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes it has nothing to do with you. Sometimes it's just the way the fish is eating. So stick with it.
Yeah. Stick with it. So stick with it. And then you eventually, you might switch your fly, if you're not really, after say a bunch of casts, you're not getting anything, or do you, how many, just get to that point where if you're struggling, do you switch up your fly? Because you see these things, you might see a caddis, you might see a mayfly, you're still sitting there like, well, what's going on? What do I put on? Right.
Yeah, definitely. So after, go with the thing that you think that they're most obviously eating, right? The thing that you can kind of would be your first guess if you can't obviously observe it. And make sure I will not change unless I know that I have consistent edible drifts, more than one, way more than one, over that fish. So I've we talk about covering it, right? Have you covered that fish consistently with edible drifts? And it's still, or maybe you see it come up and refuse, change it. It could have refused because of a bad drift, right? But if you put some good edible drifts over it and you are getting refusals, or is just totally not interested, switch it up. One of my favorite fish and I can't even believe I remember this because I have a terrible memory, but I had a random day off and went, we had slate drakes coming off like crazy. And, you could see what this fish was eating. And this kind of just goes opposite to everything I just said. But that just, that's Penn's Creek. So, this fish was like totally just crushing slate drakes right in front of me in this really tricky little spot. And so I just, have a perfect cut wing, and it is in line, taxiing down the runway, and the fish is just every single one, just not letting them go by.
Yeah.
Just totally eats the one in front of me, skips mine, and eats the pine needle.
Oh,
floating behind it. Yeah, which is infuriating. So I put on a caddis and caught that fish.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, don't ask me why, but...
What kind of caddis? Like an elk hair?
No, I'm a big fan of just a leggy looking CDC, simple.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, right. So you put on a simple caddis, and you didn't even think that's what they're feeding on, but you just threw on a fly, is kind of one in your box of tricks.
It's just buggy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a buggy. Wow, that's when they get a reminder, right, that you never know, and it's good to have a good diverse mix. But I think we've all had those situations where you're out there fishing, the fish are rising, maybe they're small, whatever, maybe they're big, but they're just not taking your stuff. And like you said, they're taking pine needles, they're taking everything, but they don't want your fly. So that's a big struggle. And it's just like, but I mean, you provided a few good, tips for that.
Yeah.
Today's episode is sponsored by Jackson Hole Fly Company. They may sound like a new company to you, but they've been designing and manufacturing high-quality gear since 1978. 1978, that was a heck of a long time ago, and there's some history there. That's, I don't want to age myself, but that wasn't long around the time I was born. But in 2020, they launched JH Flyco and started selling gear directly to people all over the country. They have a huge selection of fly rods, reels, lines, all sorts of stuff. You can check them out right now at JH Flyco, and you actually can get 25% off right now on your first order if you go to jhflyco.com/swing, and you also get free shipping on orders over $50. We got some good stuff going with Jackson and JH Flyco this year. We're doing a Top Fly Challenge as we speak. So if you want to head over to that Top Fly Challenge, you can always grab a chance to win some flies and check it out right now. But if you want to support this podcast and support a great fly shop, you can head over to jhflyco.com/swing. Check it out right now. 25% off. Okay, back to the show. So I think we could talk definitely, all day about dry flies. I'd love to do that. I want to touch on Euro nymphing a little bit because I was out recently. I was with Jeff from Maverick, and he's got this cool Euro nymphing setup, which is unique. But he was kind of showing me the ropes there, and Euro nymphing is interesting because right, you got all sorts of different things. You got this line, which isn't really a line. And then you it's like it can be challenging. But can you talk about that a little bit when you're Euro nymphing? Say out there on Penn's Creek or some of those areas, what's your setup? Let's just start there. What's that look like?
Yeah, well, I guess it differs in the moment, and what I fish personally is not necessarily what I guide with. I'm always happy to share that information with people or fish what I do fish with them if those are their goals for the day, or if that's specifically something that they want to work on. Otherwise, I'm typically guiding with a heavier, more tapered leader. Whereas for myself, I'm sure you've had people on that have talked about the micro leader as much as I absolutely hate them. I absolutely love them. It's kind of just one of those like necessary evils. But I currently, my setup for guiding is I fish the Hends leader actually. I just think it's stiff. It turns over well. I found that people can really cast it well.
How do you spell that?
Hens, Hends.
Okay.
Yeah, and I just it actually, I forget I'm sorry that this is the type of thing that I don't remember exactly how it comes in the package, but
no worries.
I kind of find the heaviest part of that taper because I do think I think you can get them in like 4X. I mean, they're quite long, but I'll find the heaviest part of that taper, cut it there. That's where I'll put on my sighter to a tippet ring.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, I like the material. I think people fish it well. It's just kind of the setup that I found to be cost effective. It's really easy to tie one up for someone at the end of the day and works really well in a ton of different situations.
And that comes, so the Hens leader comes basically ready to go. If you want a 4X leader, it's basically a built leader. Is that, and you, like you said, just tie it right on to what you have already going?
Yeah, well, no, I mean, I cut it way back from the 4. I bet I get it to about 1, and I cut it to the heaviest part of the taper because I just find that that's what people are able to cast the best. So I'm definitely fishing something heavier with 4 when I'm guiding.
Yeah. What about when you're on your own? I mean, maybe we talk about Team USA, that setup, but what if you were just kind of doing your own thing? What would your setup look like?
Yeah, so that's where I'd be most of the time fishing a micro leader. And usually that's something like 4 or 5X. I've been experimenting with different materials. You've got to find what works for you, because what works for you may not be what works well for someone else, or, the setups they're fishing. I've been really, the rod matters when it comes to your own nymphing, especially when you're fishing something like micro leaders. And I've, feel lucky that we're Thomas and Thomas shop.
Mm-hmm.
We've, the Contact series. And so I'm lucky to fish with some good stuff. And I feel like you get to a point where that matters quite a bit. And so that, coupled with the leader, is, one of the most important things, in my opinion, when it comes to your own nymphing.
Yeah. So the micro leaders are essentially how are they different from just putting on like a thin, whatever, just a long tippet? Describe for those that don't know, what is the micro leader?
Yeah, so it's essentially just like you would think of like a mono rig or something, but it's 4 or 5X, 3, 4, 5, depending on what I started out like with 3, and then to 4, and then to 5. But from a setup perspective, it can be exactly the same. In competition, our leader length, it is regulated. So it's not like, when I'll typically guide with a longer leader than I fish personally. And so, making sure that length is something. Do you want fly line in your fingers, or do you want that leader in your fingers to be able to, for that feeling? And so I like, yeah. Yeah. But the micro leader, it's incredibly frustrating, but also a wonderful tool.
Right. And it's just frustrating just because it's like, again, the big frustration with Euro is the casting, right? That seems like that's the biggest thing for people, that you might not even be casting a line. It might be, right, the mono, or depending. When you have a new client come in and you're like, okay, we're going to be nymphing, doing some Euro today. Do you find that's a big struggle, or is the setup you have with them something you can actually cast pretty easy?
Yeah. So one of my absolute favorite parts of fly fishing is, people call it an art. Yeah, sure, it's an art. It's beautiful, but it's also just physics, right?
Yeah.
And physics is something that we all understand, or should understand, or experience it every moment of every day. And so if we think about, people get frustrated with all sorts of different things with fly fishing, obviously, but breaking it down into physics, I feel like I've had success in just helping people understand it in that way. And it also makes it, like, oh, this is a thing that you can do. It's not you, right? We have to look at, how you're moving your body and how you're using your body, and then change that in a way that physically affects the cast. So to help people, I actually find teaching people to cast what I'm guiding with is actually pretty easy. I think starting out with more, obviously not a micro leader, starting out with something that's heavier, with more of a taper, and weight, right? That weight is going to help you learn that cast and the accuracy of that cast so much more. When you're casting, whatever is downstream of you or behind you with your rod tip, your flies, all of that is a mirror image of what your cast is going to be. So paying attention to where your flies are, if there's any slack is going to take that transfer of energy out, right? It's going to just totally kill your cast. So starting out with something heavier that lets you feel where your flies are more, it's going to give you more control, and just understanding the dynamics of it, right? That it's not dissimilar from how you cast a weight forward floating line, but that's not necessarily the best way to start. Water loading, using weight and the water as your friend to learn the feel of casting it. And, the more and more you do that, then the more you can get into how you would cast in a way that's not dissimilar from casting
Just a regular
fly
setup.
line, right? Yeah, and being able to do that in the wind with a microliter. It's all about utilizing the water.
Yeah, and that is so, and that's those are some good tips. Yeah, I think that is the thing, is using the water as the water loading it. And are you, when you're out there, are you making at times where you're picking it up and shooting out, just a normal forward cast, coming up and shooting it out, or is it always, or is the water load usually the better way to do it?
So when I'm guiding, I think I typically usually always have people using the downstream water load technique. But I like to also show people like, hey, because we're essentially lobbing this in a way, or we're working on a tuck cast or any of that, I like to show them that we can get this cast under trees or into weird spots, right? And we just want to, that line's going to follow using the water load technique, that, your flies are going to follow your rod tip. So long as we keep our rod tip and make sure we load and have no slack as we're coming forward with that cast slowly, and then accelerating and shortening the trajectory of the cast and accelerating at the right time and keeping that rod tip, below whatever structure we're trying to fish around, near or under, you can get everywhere.
Yeah, you can. That's cool. So, and I'll make a note. You mentioned Thomas and Thomas. We had an episode we had with them on. We talked about some of the Euro nymphing rods as well. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. And today we're not going to be able to dig in obviously super deep into Euro, but I just want to touch on that because it is a hot topic. Do you find that at the shop people come in and they're kind of, is Euro, is that always a kind of a hot topic, or what's it look like when you get somebody new that comes to the shop?
Yeah, I absolutely, right. It's the thing people are reading about. It's the thing people are having a lot of success with. It's incredibly effective pretty much everywhere. I know it gets a bad rep in certain places, but I want to break that barrier.
Yeah.
Because it is such a fun way to fish nymphs and dry dropper. It's I feel like it's more intuitive and makes you think about it more in a way that I really enjoy. And Penn's Creek is kind of like the perfect teacher for that, right? We, have tons of enormous rocks and lots of cool structure and really diverse water. And so, you can come fish a, floating line with a bobber and do just fine, right? But that's going to be a lot of mending and a lot of work. And while I like to work hard, I don't feel like working hard in that way leads to catching more fish or better fish. I think Euro nymphing is the way to do that, right? Longer rods, reaching over all those different seams and currents to slow your flies down as much as you absolutely can, because that's what matters.
All right.
In the places that you need them to be. And
how do you do that? How do you do that, Tess, when you're fishing and you say you're trying to hit a spot on the other side of the creek or somewhere, and it's swinging down on you? How do you slow that fly down?
Well, I'm 5'5", so I don't have an enormous wingspan either. So a longer rod can definitely be incredibly helpful because the quicker you get those flies under your rod tip, the slower they're going to go. So whether it's like inching closer to that area as much as you can, or the nature of your cast, right? Flattening your cast, stopping it earlier, getting those flies, we use the term contact quite a bit, obviously, but getting those flies under that rod tip or, just below and behind that rod tip as quickly as possible is going to lengthen your drift, lengthen the portion of your drift where your flies are moving the slowest quicker.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And accuracy of the cast is incredibly important to that.
Right. So there's a tip there, is that if you're trying to hit something on the other side of the creek or far away, you're not going to have your flies under your rod, but that's what you want, because if they're under your rod, the direct connection down to the bottom. Yeah, I'm trying to think of that. I don't know the physics exactly on the water, but essentially that slows down the fly if it's right below your rod tip.
Right. It gives you control. And when I say right below, I mean like right below and behind, right? Because you need that, the bit of the lead. But
right, because you're kind of dragging it through or guiding it.
I guess a big thing that I didn't say in that is it's managing your line, right? Because if you're fishing really far away from yourself, your drift is going to be shorter. So making sure that you're putting the slowest, most accurate part of your drift over where you think that fish is sitting. And that comes down to casting accuracy and line control. So that's really important when you're fishing further away from yourself, because your drift, the best part of your drift is going to be shorter. But that doesn't mean that you can't have a lot of line and a lot of slack in a way that's good in order to slow those flies down too, if you're fishing really far away from yourself. So it's a hard thing to talk about without seeing it, I suppose.
Right.
But I think a takeaway there, and maybe there are people that can explain this a hell of a lot better than I can. So that there's obviously probably the biggest part. But the important, I feel like, takeaway from that though is getting on the water and just watching what you personally do with how your body is relating to your drift that slows your flies down the most, and then experimenting with that.
How do you know when your flies are slowed down, right? How would you know if they're going too fast?
So just pay attention to what your leader is doing in contact with the water and how fast it's moving in relation to the water. I definitely want them moving slower, right? Because what's happening on the surface isn't what's happening subsurface from a hydrology perspective, right? Like it's, going to be moving quicker on the surface most of the time. And so just, watching, like when you're fishing a bobber, for instance, you want it, moving a bit slower than those bubbles. It's not dissimilar, right? I, a lot of the times, don't think I can have a drift moving too slow. That's obviously not stuck on the bottom.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily want them dragging on the bottom. I want them strategically placed in the water column, but as slow as I can possibly get them.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you don't want them dragging. They're just that's why having multiple flies is cool, right? You're hitting all the different levels of where those fish might be.
Right.
Yeah. This is awesome. Yeah. Then again, it's like there's a lot of technical pieces to that. I want to touch on the gear real quick, just because I know people are always interested in that. So, let's just go into the rod and a little bit there. So you mentioned Thompson Thomas. What would be the one, the rod, the like weight and length that you would use?
Oh my gosh, we're such gear junkies. So I guide with the 11-foot. Well, the old Contact 1 and the Contact 2. I absolutely love the Contact 2 11-foot 2-inch 3-weight. I've noticed a really big difference between the first, the Contact 1 and the Contact 2. The sensitivity of that new series is just really wonderful. And I like, as somebody who's 5'5", I like having a little bit of a longer rod in a lot of situations. That comes down again to those flies where they are in relation to your rod tip. You can kind of get a little over them a little bit easier without going swimming. I also really, really love it's the 10-foot. I think it's 9-inch. Why? Of course, this is going to leave me right now.
Yep.
2-weight. And so I fish that quite a bit. I like to fish lighter rods just because I feel like it can be so much more fun. But obviously, when it comes to Euro nymphing, that sensitivity is really important. That tippet protection is really important, especially when you're fishing incredibly light tippet, which nobody likes to do, but sink rate matters. And so that's it. Yeah, and I really, the Contact 1 is I've fished that and guided with that for years, and then started fishing that 2-weight just because of that increased sensitivity. But it's not necessarily something that I'd want to guide with on Penn's Creek, because fighting fish quickly, getting them in the net quickly is one of the best things we can do for them. But I found that the Contact 2 11-foot 2-inch 3-weight is the happy, perfect medium between the other two rods.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And talk about the line in a little bit there. So you've got your backing on there, and then what is the line? Is this just like your level line sort of thing? Describe that a little bit.
Yeah. Actually, I didn't even mention my favorite rod. So if I'm going fishing and for fun, for whatever, and I just want to take one rod, it's the Contact again, obviously, but it's the 10-foot 3-weight. That 10-foot 3-weight is obviously not only a wonderful Euro nymphing rod, it's my absolute favorite little dry fly rod.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. I people laugh at me when I say this, but it's just everything, that you love out of that, the fact that it's a Euro rod also transfers really well to it being a great dry fly rod. It's very accurate. It's soft. It's fun. You still get all that tippet protection. I just find that I can be really deadly accurate with it.
All right.
Yeah.
How do you do that would you do that? So I'm just thinking again, you've got like a level kind of a Euro line or whatever it is there. And then you're using your weight to cast, but when you're dry fly, you don't have a lot of weight. How would you cast that Euro setup? Or are you switching your line up?
So it depends, right? You can absolutely fish a dry dropper with either the leader that we were talking about that I guide with, that Hens leader. I find that throws dry flies really well, and that's just to a Euro line. I fish a lot of the SA lines. I've been really, really happy with what they have out there, and you can also do that with that micro leader that I was talking about. But like when I'm dry fly fishing, if I'm fishing for fun, I'm fishing a floating line. So I'll put that floating line on that 10-foot 3-weight if I'm fun dry fly fishing and don't need to do anything in a hurry. But I love actually, people are like, oh, when I'm fishing, I don't want to carry more than one rod because and I'm totally get that. And there really wasn't anything out there that was like a setup that you could change back and forth quickly, because when people want to dry fly fish, they typically want to fish a floating line and not just, have to worry about like a mono rig or anything. So actually SA now has a really great system where it's like, I forget how many feet it is of just, Euro line, which is really important because anytime you get a weighted fly line in those guides, it's going to, pull those flies back to you when you're nymphing. So I think that Euro line is incredibly important, or having a mono line long enough. That means that fly line isn't going to get into your guides. But they have, it's really affordable, but it's like, you can essentially pop on this, 20 feet or whatever it is of Euro line with your Euro leader. And it actually comes with one, and it comes on a spool. So you can just, carry it in your pack easily. It doesn't take up a lot of room, and you don't have to your rod's all strung up. So you don't have to worry about changing that. And you just pop that on and off to go back.
Right. So it's essentially like putting a tip on. So you still have your Euro line on there. It's just underneath the actual dry line tip that you threw on there.
Yeah, or vice versa, right? You have your weighted fly line, and then you put on that Euro line that goes into your reel, and then yeah.
You put the Euro line the other way. Gotcha.
Yeah. The other really great option is Hardy makes a great cassette reel system that I use for my lake lines, or also my like bass streamer lines and stuff. And so that's another really easy thing that you can have in your pack. So where you only have to carry one rod and can switch those cassettes out really easily, have one with a Euro line on it, one with a floating line, and just be able to switch them out really easily and not have to carry more than one rod.
Yeah, there you go. That's another good possibility. So yeah, and SA has. Well, I'll put some links out to those lines. I wonder, do you know that line, that interchangeable thing, what that thing's called, or you could probably just search that up.
Yeah, I could. I mean, if I had better internet, I could multitask. But rural Pennsylvania.
I'll follow up. We'll put something in there. I'll get that name and throw that in there, because I think, I mean, you mentioned the rods, having this line set up. I think that SA thing would be cool, and so you can kind of easily change it out, because that is the struggle. Casting a dry fly with a Euro line is tough. You could probably do it with the dry dropper, right? Because you have a little bit of weight on there. So good. Well, we've dug into this a little bit. I want to touch on, and this is on the Euro line as well, Euro stuff as well, but the Team USA. I definitely don't want to leave that out there, because, you're, I think, I can't remember, maybe this was a few years ago when you first got going, or maybe this is recently, but talk about that. How did the Team USA come to be? Because that seems like a limited number of people in the world can do that. How did you come to that opportunity?
So this is the women's team. Yeah, that's a great question. I have no idea. No, I've been lucky enough to work with the youth team quite a bit in the past, and so that's how I kind of got introduced to the competition world. And so FIPS Moosh, which is the governing body of that international competition, they're the ones that finally, decades after or decades later, decided to, host the first ever women's specific world championship. And so,
when was that? What year was that?
That was this year.
This was the first ever women's?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it was supposed to be 2 years ago, but COVID.
Oh, wow.
So
So this
yeah,
is literally the first ever. I mean, which is crazy to think, right? That is unbelievable. It's just, it
yeah.
seems like, again, we should be past all that. But again, challenge is probably like the funding, right? It's like never, not, it's not like you have a bunch of sponsors that are paying for all this stuff, right? And there's a big money making thing. This is like a grassroots sort of thing, right?
Yeah, yeah. That's the tough part. Definitely the financial aspect of it. And maybe one day we'll get to, BAS status where we've got sponsors and whatnot. But
Yeah.
maybe that's also not a good thing. But I actually think it's an opportunity for a really good thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we once they obviously decided to make that an official sanctioned competition, the it really started through the U.S. Angling Confederation and some people on the youth team that were passionate about, making sure that there was inclusivity. Because I'm not one of those. One of the really cool things about fly fishing is that it's not gender specific, and it's wonderful to create like space and like safe space and good learning opportunities for women. And I think that was kind of the thought behind creating the women's team, right? Is just getting more women involved in competition in a way that, spoke to them specifically. And I think that it started to do that. And I hope that as more people learn about it and hear about it, it will continue to do that. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity to reaching a lot of women that wouldn't necessarily, find themselves into, you know, competition without maybe having the women's team kind of as a vessel to do that. So I think it's a great way to help a lot of women, up their skills and be competent anglers in a way that not, that wouldn't maybe happen without the women's team.
So, and is it 8 people or how many women make the team?
Yeah, so we have the national team is a group of 10, and it's not set at 10, right? It's like, you want to make sure you've got a lot of, good, talented people to draw from. So I think in the future there's potential for the national team to be larger than 10, would be my hope. But then from that, the world's team is made up of 5 competitors with a reserve.
Okay, so 5. And was there a competition this year or last year?
Yeah. So it was in July, or yeah, beginning of July this year. The first ever women's world championship was held in Norway.
Wow. And how did that, not that, but I haven't heard. I mean, how did that go? What was it? Describe that experience. So you're heading over to Norway. I mean, that's got to be unbelievable right there. But what was that experience like?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm not one to like paint a false pretty picture, right? Like this is the first ever team and the first ever world championship, and it was really, really, really difficult. In fact, the first, we went over a few weeks early to practice, and there was a point where, one of my really close friends and fellow guide Lindsay and fellow teammate Lindsay Zoffren in Red Lodge, Montana, where we were like, we're never going to do this again. This is just
Oh, wow.
there's no way. And it turned, and just that's personal, that's dynamics, that's all of these things, right? That, fishing with people who've maybe never worked in a team setting, and that's really hard, and not necessarily, knowing how to work together in a way that focuses on that team mentality. And I am really happy to say that maybe like 4 days before the competition started, there was a really big shift with quite a few of the women, and that includes the reserve and the manager, and obviously our coach. That something that I wasn't expecting to happen was us all to, some of us really pull together and fish as a team, which was the most unbelievable feeling. And I know that we can attribute that to a lot of our success. We missed a bronze medal by 1 placing point,
Wow.
which, I go into everything of like, I want to win. I want to do really well, even though I know that's a really high expectation to have,
Hmm.
especially being like this new coming team when some of these teams have been fishing together for decades. But to come in and to do that well, I don't want to say that I wasn't expecting it, but just with our incredibly limited experience and like newcomers to the competition world in general. It was really cool. And I can absolutely say that I want to do it again.
Yeah. So that was a good experience. That's really cool. And the first year, then that's interesting. Yeah. So there's been in other countries, women's teams, they're doing, I mean, they've been competing, and it's just new. Like the Team USA is the new to the scene. Is that kind of situation?
Yeah, definitely. Yep.
Yeah.
And we're new to, I mean, not only is the women's team in this country new to international competition, we're new completely. And then the members of our team, most of us are really new to competition. So it's been like a crash course. And so it's really cool to see, like where we are, and the potential.
Today's episode is sponsored by LakeLady Rods. You can reach LakeLady right now at 218-251-2626. Check in with Chris and see what he has going. That's the best way to let him know that you're interested, or at least find out what kind of rods he has for you. I've got a fine-tuned specimen that I'm going to be breaking out here on the river this next week. A blue rod, a gunmetal reel seat, a sweet Portuguese handle, and it's got all the fixins, all the bells and whistles, including that nice jungle cock. This is a 9-foot 4-weight, and it just casts like a dream. I'm excited to be getting in on this one, and actually I might let the kids use this rod on this trip, even though they got a couple of fiberglass rods, which maybe we'll switch it up. Maybe I'll let the kids use the Chris's LakeLady rod, and I'm going to use the fiberglass. I think we got let's see, I guess we got the 8-footer, 7-footer, and 8-footer. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to break out the old fiberglass this trip. But if you want to check out what Chris has going, he also works on bamboo rods, builds those from scratch, all sorts of good stuff going there. You can check in with him right now at LakeLady Rods. And the best thing, like I said earlier, is just give him a call, 218-251-2626. And if you can, this is the way to support this podcast. If you give Chris a call right there and just check in with him, pick his brain a little bit, ask him about rods, see what he has going. Would be awesome if we can get a bunch of people reaching out to Chris this week after this episode. Okay, back to the show. So going back to the, and I want to dig into this just for a sec, because people, I'm sure I'd love to hear some, some women, girl, whoever listening out there that maybe this would be a thing for them. So how did you get to be on that team? What was that like? Describe that.
Yeah, so there was an application process. COVID made, everything weird. So a couple of years ago, when it was decided to try to put this team together, a group of people essentially created a steering committee, and this included people with a lot of experience, with the adult team and the youth team. So these are, people that know what they're looking for. Created essentially a criteria and thus an application, and kind of narrowed down a team from there, and then started having some clinics to, reach out, get more women involved, and that led to a national competition. And from that, this year's team was national team was named with 10 people, and then 5 of us, and actually 2 reserves, were named to the world's team this year. So and that was based off of obviously experience, competition, nationals, all that good stuff.
And you competed, so that was part of it. Was the national? You actually had a competition in the U.S. where everybody competed, and then from that helped guide the finalists or whatever.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Gotcha. Okay, so if somebody wanted to get involved now, they could probably call you, right? Or check in with you to find out how to get into it. But essentially that's it. You got to get into these competitions and then hopefully, do a good job and get your name in there. It sounds like literally you're talking about 5 people. It always blows me away because it seems like almost impossible to do it, right? Like with such a few people, such few people going. But would you say it is possible if somebody's really thinks that's what they want to do, they should go for it?
Oh my God. Yeah, absolutely. Without a doubt. And we want to encourage that. We need more women, because the more women we have, the more competitive we are, and the more that we're all individually having to work and learn to up our own skills. And I think that obviously that type of competition, even within the country itself, just leads to a better team. So I would absolutely encourage people to reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to help in any way possible. And, we have a lot of, we're really lucky on the East Coast to have a lot of, mini comps, smaller competitions that are affordable, accessible. And you're typically fishing with people that have fished in lots of world competitions, especially here in central Pennsylvania. And I found that atmosphere of those small, like regional competitions to be incredibly supportive, right? And you're just, learning from the best in a way that is that I wasn't expecting to be really, really supported in that way. And I know that's will be true for anyone, any other women that want to start getting involved. Yeah. So yeah, definitely reach out.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right, perfect. So we dug into that a little bit. I'm feeling good about that. And so I want to dig in a little bit into the lodge, the feathered hook, right? So you have this thing going. Talk about that. What's the this new lodge? Because that's something especially in the lower 48, you don't find a lot of lodges for some reason, right? But this is one. Well, first of all, are there other lodges, or is this the only one you could find out in that part of the country?
That's a good question. I mean, it would be a bad business partner answer for me to say that I don't know, but so I do know a bit. But yeah, there are other lodges in Pennsylvania. I think they, perhaps focus on different things. Obviously there are quite a lot of them out west, and I would say that our lodge is kind of in that Western style, that all-inclusive type of experience, which isn't totally normal in an area like this, and is very different from what we offer at the bed and breakfast down the road. So yeah, this is our second year. It's been a ton of fun, a huge learning experience, but we got really lucky with a just beautiful space, an 1800s farmhouse that we spent a winter redoing, and an unbelievable stretch of Pine Creek, which is a major and really important tributary to Penn's Creek, and is one of the reasons Penn's Creek stays really cold. And I always come back to, like, from the conservation perspective, and just having to be like a steward of this water is like a privilege, and like kind of a scary responsibility too. And it's really fun to share. It's such a different water type than Penn's Creek. And so being able to, have guests come here and do a day on the private water, which is just like, you're just kind of hiding behind these trees and stuff, targeting these, big rising fish in crystal clear, still water. And then, a day on Penn's Creek, and then, a day of a smallmouth float. It's just a really amazing thing to have, all of these different types of fisheries in your backyard and to share with people. And they're all like its own, different skill set, because I firmly believe to be a good angler, and absolutely a good competitive angler, is you have to be a diverse angler. You can't just be a Euro bro or whatever. I hate that, like, that's how, don't get me wrong. Of course, Euro nymphing is one of the most effective ways to catch fish, but that's not going to help you on a lake. That's not going to help you on a spring creek like Pine Creek here. And, we fish water similar to that in Norway, right? So if you're not a diverse angler, you're not going to do well. And that's what I like to also share with my clients, is how to be diverse and to do it all well. Yeah. And then, of course, you have my mother, who is our lodge manager here, chef extraordinaire, who is much, much nicer than I am. And people come to the lodge just to see her, because she's just that wonderful. So, we kind of have it all.
Yeah, that's awesome. So basically, somebody you could go there, get the whole all-inclusive, spend however many days you need to, and then get the experience. I love that you went into the diversity, because we kind of touched on that today, right? We talked about Euro. We talked about dries. Occasionally we don't talk as much about, wet flies, on here. But I guess that's one question. Do you ever, is that something that anybody is doing out there at all, like any sort of wet fly type fishing?
Oh, please. Yes, I call it
Yeah.
gentleman's nymphing.
Yeah.
I every year always have clients that don't want to nymph. And of course, I like to meet people where they are, right? Like this is their day. I want to help them enjoy it, in the way that they want to enjoy it, but also learn something and kind of push that a little bit. So yeah, I mean, we absolutely swing wet flies, and swinging wet flies is a really wonderful way to target those fish that are eating emergers, ones that we talked about earlier that can be really tricky to catch. So yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
definitely fish wet flies.
And with the wet flies, is there same thing like matching the hatch? You kind of figure out what they're on, whether that's a caddis or whatever, and then throw that on and swinging it down, like kind of down and across.
Yeah, yeah. Again, I think it's big on slowing it down, right? Whether you're utilizing weight to do that or your mends to do that, slowing it down, making it natural. Of course, you could just be standing there with having a conversation with, your
Yeah.
like a fly hanging in the water and a fish is going to come up and grab it and just, makes you feel like an idiot. But I mean, case in point, wet flies are effective. But yeah, fishing it kind of down in the 45, slowing it down. And sometimes giving it a bit of movement. I like to fish, 2, 3 flies, and have different profiles kind of for each of them, and kind of that lets you control where they are in the water column a bit more too.
That's sweet.
Yeah.
That's sweet. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I always like to highlight. We've had Davey Watton on a few times, talked about wet fly, fishing, and he's got his own way to do it. So I'll put a link to that one as well. No, this is good. I think that we've got a good taste of, if somebody, we started off like, coming in there, right? So you talked about the different seasons. And is the lodge, is that going, is there a time frame where that's not open, or what's that look like?
No, it's open all year round. And that's another cool thing about this stretch of Pine Creek is that, you can fish it 365 days a year. The fish are always cold. So yeah, and the lodge is always warm or cold, whichever season.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. Well, I always love to take it out in a little bit of a random question. So, and you mentioned your dog at the start, so I've got to go there. What do you have? What's the name of your dog? It sounds like it's a water dog.
Oh man, so people of course always like, in this industry ask you, oh, do you know such and such? And like for years I always say, okay, I don't know who anybody is and nobody knows who I am, which is one, a bad business model that I've been working on, but two, everyone knows my dogs. My dog who I unfortunately lost last year, his name was Poe. He was a Bernese Mountain Dog. Everybody knew him because he would carry my net. I mean, like,
oh wow,
cool. Absolutely no. I mean, it's not a joke. He wouldn't let me get out of the river without grabbing it, and would carry it all the way back to the car. And so he was a really, really special dog. But I am lucky in that I now have a Newfoundland. His name is 8, like the number. And he's also an incredibly special, very, very smart, very goofy dog that is turning out to be quite the fishing buddy. So,
is he carrying your net now as well?
No, he's more of like, he's quite big, obviously, and of course, in my boat, his thing now is sitting directly next to you, like on the bench seat, which I don't know how he fits, and I don't know how much longer that's going to last, but no, he's a good boat dog. So yeah, we'll see where he gets with the net.
What boat are you using there?
We have a couple rafts, Stealthcraft rafts, but then I have a Clacka Headhunter skiff.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and you use that for, where would you use those boats for? Because I'm picturing more of a smaller setting on some of the stuff we talked about today.
Yeah, so we do floats on Penn's Creek when the flows are up, never during the chunk of the season, right? Because this is a wade river, and we would never want to interfere with people out there wading. But sometimes, like that March, very early April timeline, when flows are at 900, 1,000, people aren't out there wading, but we can still have awesome rising fish. So that's a really good time to jump in one of those rafts and do a good float. But then the drift boats we have for our bass floats.
Oh, for the bass. Yeah. And the drift boat. Just now describe that, the difference between, the Clacka and the raft. Why would the Clacka be better than the raft for, say, smallmouth?
Oh, it's just roomier. Absolutely roomier. Better fish streamers out of, kind of the way you stand, how you can manage your line and wind. Nobody wants to row a raft on big water in the wind.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And what's the big water? What are you hitting for smallmouth?
The Juniata.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Juniata. That's right. God, this is great. I love the podcasting is cool because we've done so many episodes now that there's old ones we did, a few years back where we talked about some of these rivers, right? And it's kind of circling back around. Pennsylvania is probably, you know what I mean, like one of the hot spots for sure around the country. Do you find, when you look around, you got to Norway, that must have been amazing, like we said, but do you look around the country and say, hey, I want to go to this spot? Or have you been, do you have thoughts of really having your bucket list for like other fishing areas?
Absolutely. I love to travel, and I actually spend the giant chunk of my summer out in Bozeman. I kind of just like to sneak away for a little bit, do some backcountry stuff. So I feel really fortunate to be able to do that. But I love saltwater. Where I want to go is just the place that I can go next.
Right.
Yeah. So the list is really long.
You're kind of like me. It's like, I don't really care where I go. It's just get me in a plane and just or a car, right? A plane or a car, and just go to somewhere different. And the fishing is almost like I was just out, this week and at a new place, and I didn't really care. I wanted to catch fish, obviously, but just being there was like that's my goal.
Yeah.
I knew that was going to be awesome. So is that kind of the same way you are?
Absolutely. If it's, I don't know, there's just so much to learn about so many fisheries all over the place. And if it's trout specific, then I'm there to just be mellow and, enjoy what's around me. But if it's any other species, then it's a little bit of both.
That's right. Describe this. So now we're going into, kind of September. September, October. What are the next kind of the rest of this year looking for you? What's your, anything you want to give a shout out to coming up?
Yeah. So we have our fall season coming up. We're booked, October through the middle of November, weather depending. It's a really fun time to fish. We've still got some openings. So if you want to experience Penn's Creek, fall can be one of the best times to do that. It's just really beautiful. And the fish are still really hungry. We've got a few hatches that happen too. So it's a less crowded, different time, but can be absolutely as rewarding. I typically always go somewhere warm. I make a point to try and fit that in. Whether it's for redfish, I go down to Mosquito Lagoon a bit and do that. I actually always also go down to Texas to go just good old bass fishing. Dennis kind of escapes the owner of our fly shop escapes for a few months, and we all go meet him down there and don't even take fly rods. So, yeah. That's
cool. That's really awesome. Yeah. So, and I think I was thinking Mollie Simpkins, I think may have been the person who first connected me, to you. I'm not sure. I'm sure it's Mollie. Yeah. You have a connection with Mollie, right?
Yeah. She's a good friend. Very
cool.
Good friend.
Yeah. So definitely shout out to Mollie. We had a fun episode we put together, talking about everything she has going with the guide relief program and everything. But this has been fun today. I think that, I would like to go to Pennsylvania, that's on my bucket list. I would love to learn more about Euro and mono nymphing and stuff. So maybe I'll see you there sometime at the shop and check in with you. But we'll give a shout out. It's thefeatheredhook.com if people want to connect with you.
Yes, thefeatheredhook.com.
Awesome. All right, Tess, well, thanks again for all the time today and all your tips and tricks here. I think that you've shed some light on, definitely it's helped me get prepared, right, for that next dry fly that comes off or whatever. But thanks for all the time today. We'll talk to you soon.
No, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
So there it is, wetflyswing.com/364. 364 is going to get you some of the links we talked about, some of the videos we talked about, and anything else we covered, including that link to the giveaway. We're going to have a link there, and you could also go to wetflyswing.com/giveaway, and that'll redirect you over to the page where you can enter this Steelhead School giveaway, which is going to be a lot of fun. Like I mentioned earlier, Jeff Liskay is going to be leading the school. We're going to have some of his other guides on this trip, so it's going to be pretty much, if you're looking to up your spay game, maybe whether you even haven't got started with spay, we're going to be digging into this. I'll also put a link out to the episode I did with Jeff where we really dug into everything that this area offers and what the trip's going to look like. So check it out right now, wetflyswing.com/giveaway. Okay, we're going to head on out of here today. I hope you are sticking with it, and I hope you're able to plan a couple of good trips, maybe more than a couple of trips, as we're heading into the fall here. We're looking at the fall. We're looking at winter. We got a good winter coming up here. I hope you've got some good stuff planned, and I would love to catch with you maybe on the water somewhere. That would be great. If you got an idea for a trip you'd love to connect with, send me an email at dave@wetflyswing.com. And maybe we can put something together for you down the line. If you have an idea for a guest or topic, again, always love to hear from you. Or if you just want to give a shout out and let me know you're here and you've been listening out there and you haven't connected with us, you can also check us out on social media, Wetfly Swing. Good way to follow the show. All right, I hope you have a good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, wherever you are in the world, and I look forward to talking to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com.